Welcome to Afrometrics research-based news. We're joined today by Dr. James Maiden, Dr. Delarius O. Stewart, Dr. Natalie Mizelle Johnson, and Dr. Daryl H. Thorne. Dr. James Maiden serves as an acting associate dean in the College of Agriculture and Urban Sustainability and Environmental Sciences, and as an assistant professor of counseling at the University of the District of Columbia. As an educator, clinician, scholar, and administrator, he's actively engaged in spearheading the transformational power of universities to improve lives, to spark innovation, strengthen workforce development, and enhance communities. As a scholar, he explores health inequalities and social determinants. He has a successful record of publication in refereed academic journals, in peer-reviewed conference proceedings, and academic conference presentations. Additionally, he is recognized as an expert on topics around mentoring. He has also developed funded research projects and has secured grants totaling more than $900,000. And Dr. Maiden earned a Bachelor's of Science in Psychology, a Master's of Science in Counselor Education, and a Doctorate of Education Counseling. And he holds the National Certified Counselor credentials and is a licensed professional counselor. Dr. Delarius O. Stewart is considered by many as a voice of reason and an advocate for those who cannot speak for themselves. He's dedicated his life to fighting for a fair and just society, and for more than 15 years, Delarius has worked in rural and urban school settings as a teacher, school counselor, a school psychologist, and leader in school improvement, curriculum and instruction, student support services, and special education. He has also worked as a full-time and adjunct faculty member in the areas of counseling, psychology, special education, and educational leadership, and he's published academic and popular culture articles in the areas of Black men and mental health, adolescent behavior, special education, teaching Black boys to read, school discipline, and dyslexia. Stewart holds a doctorate in educational psychology. He's a specialist in special education and school psychology. He has a master's degrees in counseling and educational leadership, and a bachelor's in journalism. Dr. Natalie Mizelle Johnson is an associate professor and director of the graduate counseling program at the University of the District of Columbia. She has a doctorate in rehabilitation psychology from the University of Wisconsin, and has 25 years of professional experience as a rehabilitation and mental health practitioner, and 18 as a counselor educator. She has over 20 articles, book chapters, edited books, grants, and presentations, and enjoys educating, training, and supervising mental health professionals. Additionally, she conducts vocational and diagnostic assessments and evaluations, and provides consulting services to develop and implement rehabilitation, mental health, and social service research projects. Dr. Daryl H. Thorne is an assistant professor and program chair of human relations and psychology at Trinity Washington University in the District of Columbia. She has a doctorate in counseling psychology with a concentration in counselor education and supervision, and a master's in education degree in guidance and counseling. She is a nationally certified counselor and licensed clinical professional counselor in the state of Maryland, where she maintains a niche private practice. She has more than 22 years of experience as a practicing counselor and as an educator, and she began her professional career as a secondary school counselor in the Montgomery County, Maryland public school system. And 12 years, and after 12 years of working in a system, in quotes, she made a transition into the world of academia. Her scholarship has been disseminated through refereed academic journals, peer-reviewed conference proceedings, and academic conference presentations. She teaches classes about race and racism, social justice and indigenous people, counseling-based courses, and other social science classes, while forwarding an agenda of empowerment and liberation of the mind. Doctors Maiden, Stewart, Mizelle Johnson, and Dr. Thorne, welcome to Afrometrics research-based news. I'm grateful that you all accepted my invitation.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And they're here today to discuss their article, examining factors that promote doctoral degree attainment for African-American males in counselor education programs, which was published in the Journal of African-American Males in Education. You can find this article online, at least for the time being, and otherwise you can definitely find it through library search database. Absolutely. So I encourage people to go and find this this article. It's very powerful. And I wanted to start out by asking you all, each one of you all, and as you can hear from the biographies, have been involved in advising, counseling, or mentoring students to some degree and in different ways. And I wanted to ask you all, why do you think that mentorship is so important for Black graduate students in general, and based on your article, Black males in particular today?
Well, I think it's very important because to mentor Black men for multiple reasons, but in terms of counseling, we want to train mental health providers to work with people of color. And who's better to do so than having a mental health, a person of color who's a mental health provider? And reducing stigmas, because there are a lot of stigmas in our community. And it's just important that we mentor, we advise Black men to go out into the profession and to be professionals, to work with this clientele. And then finally, I think academia, because we want to promote African-American males to be successful. So we're there to mentor them, we're there to guide them and encourage them to partake in the field of counseling and complete. Because completion it's easy for someone to start a program, but the most important part is mentoring someone to complete a program.
I think if I'll jump in and say that, mentoring, we have talked amongst the four of us, and previously we've talked about the importance of kind of connecting and supporting one another, especially in spaces that have not historically been designed for people who have not been designated a person of whiteness to succeed. So I think from the basic standpoint and foundation, in terms of creating a community that is supportive to further the not just intellectual prowess in future, but just anything that a person would like to do. Historically, having that representation and guidance through mentorship has not been as solid for people who have been ascribed people of color. So I think that that just in and of itself, whether it is from the K through 12 or post-secondary standpoint, or even in careers, is a powerful thing. And then for Black males in general, again, it goes back to historically speaking, how Black males have been demasculated just throughout centuries. So I think having that network and that foundation of support, and a lot of times it's unspoken. It's not necessarily a, hey, I need help with this, can you help me? It is very much a nuanced experience and relationship, but it's very powerful. And again, most of us have not had that particular access, or it hasn't been offered to us. So I think that that's also where it's very powerful.
Okay.
As Dr. Thorne was talking, my mind ran to Albert Bandura and social learning theory. And in that theory, Bandura, as a behaviorist, said that we model or emulate the behavior from the person that we look up to or we ascribe to be like. And that really serves as the foundation work for mentoring Black males through undergraduate programs, but definitely through graduate programs. it's not uncommon for a male to say that I did not have a male teacher in my K-12 experience. It's not uncommon for a Black male to say, I did not have a Black male professor in my undergraduate experience or in my doctoral experience. So I can't ascribe to be that because I haven't seen that. It's not possible. People didn't believe that a Black man could be president of the United States until Barack Obama did it. Now I can look at my Black son and say, you too can be president. So it really, while that seems very macro in concept, it really is micro in the sense that it allows us to develop and push other Black men into graduate programs to diversify the workforce where needed, and also to continue the intellectual prowess of Black folk. I'm not a racist. Let me start there, and I know that could be microaggression, but I'm tired of other people talking about Black people in research. We're intellectuals too, so why not mentor that next generation of scholars who can talk about and create the narrative in scholarship about who we are. So it really gets down to that for me, that being the core issue for me, diversifying the workforce and furthering the narrative about Blacks in research. So I tie that to my purpose of mentoring other Black men through graduate programs, but particularly through doctoral programs.
And I just wanted to add real quick, if that's okay, that we are a collective, and I was raised, you're supposed to help your fellow man. But however, when you're a faculty member, we have to be more than that, especially with people of color, especially with males of color. So I think mentoring is a very important aspect, and having those resources available for the success of different people, especially people of color in counseling education programs.
And Dr. Mizelle, you have you have other scholarship that you published on work-related stress, right? And
that's an old one, but yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, work-related stress and several other ones that are particularly about Black women too.
Yes.
Did you find any parallels in this research? And
yes, because of the different roles that we have to take as a woman or as a man, and the different roles that we have in our families, that dictates what is important for us to be successful, especially in a counseling education program, or especially I'm gonna put my family first, am I a woman first, am I my sister, am I a mother? And that dictates, and that also adds added stress to be successful in all those particular areas, which is environmental, psychological, social. We all have these particular roles that we have to ascribe to or be prescribed to. And I think that added stress and pressure that we have to be successful in all the areas sometimes, you need other people to help you and mentor you and help guide you and facilitate, what you're doing.
I just want to add to that, just think about all of the things that Dr. Mizelle just stated, and imagine that African-American woman or that African-American male at a predominantly white institution where they may not see anyone who looks like them. That's why mentoring is important. That is why we continue to write and produce research that will give insight to universities and colleges to make decisions on how to impact the lives of young people of color entering counselor education programs.
Okay.
Can I add something too? So
yes, of course.
Kind of going back to what actually all of my colleagues have pointed to, and it's going to be no surprise to any of you, Dr. McDougall, because you met me before, for what I'm going to say. But I think it all still speaks to the underlying issue of white supremacy and racism, right? Even in listening to us have the conversation, there's like this underpinning of restrictive language or coded language and silences that I think I'm going to assert myself and just say that I think all of us are speaking to. And that is that we live in a world that has been created through the lens of whatever whiteness is, right? That it was made up and through the supremacist lens, which is sometimes so nuanced in certain spaces. And I think when you look at it from that perspective, that is also where mentoring becomes very powerful, because it's not just, to me, about moving through the academy or academia or classes, but it is really through moving through the world for a mentor who actually understands how the systems work to connect with whoever it is they are mentoring, especially African American or Black males, but also African American or Black, depending on how people identify, females and other non-people of whiteness, because there's a process of connecting to say, I see and understand your reality and possibly how you've been silenced. There's got to be a sense of trust for any mentoring relationship to be valued and valuable for either party, right? And there's got to be that transparency. And what we have to realize, this kind of goes back to kind of your disclaimer, Dr. Stewart, about I'm not a racist. No, you're not, because you don't have that power. So if we want to talk about that transparently, right? But because you bring it up means that you're seeing the world as it is. And when you have to qualify that to deny it, that means you're still conscious, and we're all still conscious that we're working under this guise of white supremacy. And that is the part that I think is powerful when we're connecting with students of color, Black students, or any other Black or brown or indigenous student, to say, no, I recognize the world that you live in, and we can have that conversation, and we can process that, we can move through it. And I am your support that says, no, what you're feeling and what you're experiencing is real. Now let's help to navigate it. And I really think that that is one of the most powerful things that mentoring relationships are there for, quite honestly.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And definitely I want you all to feel free to speak freely on this show. And I think that both you and Dr. Stewart have mentioned kind of the hostile climate that we're in, and creating, you mentioned earlier, creating a community of support on these campuses and for students. And I want to ask, and this is something that Dr. Stewart already started to talk about, what the importance of Black males being represented in doctoral programs in general is, like, why that in particular is significant. And Dr. Stewart already kind of mentioned diversify the workforce and several other things. Dr. Maiden, what do you say is the importance of the representation of Black males in doctoral programs, and then in particular counseling?
Well, representation. When you see people of color, you encourage other people of color to engage in the doctoral process. Going back to the mentoring piece just a minute, it's I think all of us here consider ourselves a mentor, and as a professor on campus, we just somehow they just designate us, or they just find us, and so that's what we do. But the representation is important, because if students don't see us in this role, they have no encouragement. They have no one to say, have that one-on-one talk to them about the steps they should take to pursue a doctorate degree. And that's not really any difference than the counseling program, other than, when you go into a counseling program, you either want to go into academia or you want to go into the mental health profession. And so we are here to talk to students about those two tracks. In some ways, we kind of help them identify what's best for them. So again, it's about us being in this role to be able to mentor, to be able to guide young men of color, young women of color to be successful with any endeavor that they choose within the counseling field.
You know, on August 28, 1964, Martin Luther King gave a new vision for equality in America in his I Have a Dream speech. And while he didn't speak specifically about let's get more blacks into higher education, let's get more blacks into master's programs, more blacks in the doctoral programs, more blacks in the professional programs, what he did argue was that the best way to get to equality was to base social contracts on hard-earned skills, and that we not be judged by the color of our skin, but by the content of our character. So in thinking about that, in that thesis for equality, Dr. King laid out a vision or platform for us to say, you know, education, in Mary McLeod Bethune's words, is the prime need for the hour. So we need more blacks, more people of color in order to diversify the workforce. That is a need. America is committed to equality and diversity, and I don't always think equity is equality, but we're committed to that. There's a synergy, if I can make a word, a re-synergy. That's my word. I own it. Re-synergized focus on equality right now, because we're living in a system where the veil of racism and systemic racism has been lifted, as we've seen black person after black person after black person after black person be murdered at the hands of police officers. But you know, that experience is not so different for me, who has lived in my black man skin for 48 years. I still get nervous when a police car is behind my car driving for no reason. So until we have more scholars in criminal justice, until we have more scholars in counseling and psychology to talk about that feeling in a very intellectual way, until we have more people at the table who can engage in those conversations in the profession as practitioners, until we have people who've experienced that, who have the lived experience of being a black male in black male skin and holding the doctorate and being able to engage in those conversations, we're not living up to Dr. King's dream of equality. So it's that simple for me to look at and think about the need to get more blacks in counseling. As a practitioner, in my part-time, I want to be a therapist role, I get so many people saying, "I'm so glad I found you because I wanted a black male for my black male for my black son," or as a black male, I wanted a black male. But sorry, I'm not taking any clients right now because I only see about 5 people at a time. And because I have a full-time life that I have to manage as well. So we need more African Americans in general, but definitely we need more black males in counseling. We are underrepresented. We have been marginalized. Dr. Maiden talked about stigmas. There are so many stigmas in the African American community around mental health. We put the crazy cousin in the back room when company comes. We don't allow him to come out. It's not okay to say that my child has autism or my child is intellectually disabled. When I was growing up, it was mentally retarded. We don't say that word now. That wasn't okay to say. It's not okay to say in the African American culture. But having more people who look like me in this, doing this work, breaking down the stereotypes, breaking down the stigmas, breaking down the things that hold us in bondage, because mental health is real, whether we want to believe it or not, then we can actually be more impactful on the world. So it's much bigger than us mentoring a black man to graduate with a doctorate. It's much bigger than that. I see the micro and macro systemic change that we make when I bring one other black male along, and then he brings another black male along, and then he brings another black male along. We're building we're building, Congressman Cummings used to always say, he talked about for children yet unborn. So we're impacting generations yet unborn when we do this. So the work is important to make the lives of Black people better. In what I do today, that person I mentor today, and next and next and next and next. So the onion is so so many layers of the onion to peel back in this conversation. But I'm pleased. So thank you for inviting us to have this conversation, because it's one that needs to happen in a very safe place. Because Dr. Thorne talked about systemic racism, and we have to unpack that, and we haven't. We have not unpacked that. So thank you for this opportunity to have this conversation.
Well, I think that I'm particularly, happy to see you all talk about this topic, because as Dr. Maiden mentioned earlier, you all are mentors and counselors, and you also have that psychological background as well. And on campuses, all of the campuses where I have colleagues, and I know people, Black students in particular, are calling for more representation of counselors, of mental health counselors on campus. All of the ones that I'm aware of. So to have not only people, Black scholars, professionals talking about mentorship, but also people with psychological backgrounds is, I'm sure that people, if I was someone on a campus and I was an administrator, I was looking at this, I would want one of you all to be someone to speak to my campus at least. And I think that Dr. Stewart has taken us down a different road, and I wanted to get, you talked about workforce, but then you also started talking about Black people in general and stigmas, et cetera, to ask Dr. Mizelle and Dr. Thorne, if you could speak to the significance of Black male representation in doctoral programs and counseling, for not necessarily in a addition to the workforce, but for the Black community in general, the larger Black community in general.
Yeah, I'll chime in. So I went to a PWI for my undergrad experience, but for my master's program, and my master's, as you mentioned, was in guidance and counseling. That was the old term for school counseling. And I deliberately went to an HBCU in Maryland, shout out to Bowie State University, in the mid 90s. And I can honestly say that was really my first experience having Black folk as my professors. And my graduate program, that representation was incredible. So I had a couple of Black male professors, and I am still in touch with them today. And that was what, almost 20 years ago or so. And so for the community at large, I think well, not even I think, I know the importance and the relevance is huge, because, you know, when we carry our bodies with us, we were in a particular space at a particular time, right? But we're always, that old saying, wherever you go, there you are. And so that representation extends beyond the classroom or the walls of academia. And there is a carriage, a certain carriage that these particular African-American, Black male, now they're my colleagues, figures hold and represent. And I think that is a very powerful representation for not just the Black males, you know, my colleagues spoke to, but also the Black females, you know. It creates this a more contextual image that is outside of the status quo mainstream, very negative stereotype of the Black male in that representation. And that then brings the power back into the community and to show all representations of us as a people.
Okay.
I don't even know if I answered your question. I kind of went on my own.
No,
Okay.
That's
no,
fine.
that was great.
That's
That was
perfectly
great, Dr.
fine.
Thorne. I wanted to add that I had the reverse situation as Dr. Thorne. So I went to a HBCU, North Carolina Central University, and then I went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison for my doctoral program. To be successful, after you left North Carolina to go all the way to Wisconsin, I had to search for others like me that was a facilitator or mentors, but I had to search for other students and other programs in order to be successful. The people that looked like me and they were going through the same struggle. They left their homes for the first time, living out of state to go live somewhere, Wisconsin, Madison. And we had to support each other. That was men and women in all the different disciplines. And it was in counseling, if you were in education, if you were in engineering, we all bonded. We all met on Sundays, most of the time for dinner all together. We had a Black graduate association that helped facilitate, pushing each other, to be successful and forward. And I think I was just thinking about the story about, I didn't have that many Black males in my graduate program. They never made it past the first semester. I think one did in special education. The others didn't. And when I reached out to see, what was going on and checking in, they felt that they didn't have enough support from the faculty. That was their number one complaint. They did not have enough support from the faculty. I didn't have the same support. I mean, we had the same support, but I had to go find it elsewhere in order to be successful. So I think as a female, I didn't feel like that was a sign of a weakness or anything to go find support elsewhere. Whereas maybe a male thinking, wait a minute, I got to find support. First of all, they might make them feel, more inferior or more uncomfortable saying I need help, reaching out for help. I didn't have that problem. I think I felt like if I have others like me, we're going through the same thing, we're going to get through this together. We're going to all get our PhD when we leave out of Wisconsin. I think the males felt some of them, I'm not speaking for some of them that I talked to, they had to take care here, that we talked about, had to take care of their family. They were already married. They had children. When I came in, I didn't have to, navigate all these different roles. So it was, I think, easier for me, not being married and not having children at the time. Even though some of my other counterparts did, I think for the particular males that were in the program, they had families and been married a while, and they had to keep their full-time job. And that was and they didn't feel like they had all the respect and the support of the faculty, at the time. And I think that makes a big difference.
Thank you. You all mentioned so many rich points that we could spend so much time on each one. I want to, before it's not too late, I want to ask, Dr. Maiden, can you talk about the aims of the research that you all did?
Well, certainly. And what you just heard is the essence of our research, social and academic integration. But I want to go back just a little bit, because I think the reason why we all are here is based upon our lived experience. And I know Dr. Thorne is looking at me. I'm in her lane now. But our lived experience is why we're here. I was a student who I didn't see an African-American instructor, professor, until I entered my doctorate program. And within that first semester, he told me he was leaving. And so I was like, but we just got here. So I've lived that experience not having anyone to mentor me or to guide me. So, and which leads us to engaging in this research, which is about social and academic integration. As Dr. Mizelle talked about, the social integration, not having that peer support, not having, or people, the lack of peer support, but her being able to find that peer support to support her through her degree attainment. We talked about Dr. Thorne, how she went to Bowie State, and she found that faculty support there. She's still in contact with the professors that she met during her master's degree. So that's the essence of what faculty, academic and social integration is. The faculty side under academic integration, the faculty concern, the ability for them to develop you. The social integration is that peer support, being able to join those organizations that you as you working with your fellow students, that's going to help you become successful within your degree.
Okay. And can you talk about some of the design? I mean, you compare the comparison, the sample.
So certainly. So we compared African American males who attained a degree at predominantly white institutions and HBCUs. And what I found is revealed on every level is that students who attended HBCUs had more faculty engagement, had more peer support, had more intellectual development, had all of these factors that that they perceived help them to earn a degree.
Okay, thank you.
May I jump in?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Okay, so this
Mhm.
kind of connects with what Dr. Maiden led this particular part of the conversation with. That kind of led to the lived experience portion. Because from my particular experience, I think coming from my undergraduate experience at, I'm very transparent. I went to Seton Hall University in New Jersey in the mid 80s. This is back when the Tawanda Brawley situation was happening out, in New York and all that. So racism was completely like the transparent, there's no mistaking, white students would say very derogative things. That was happening, right? So in that particular environment where my freshman class was entered in 1986, and we were a very small, that was like a big class, but it was very small in terms of non-white students, right?
Yeah.
But there were still pockets. There was still support. Like everybody didn't have the equal access to those particular resources. There were things I didn't even know about, right? So my experience was I had to figure things out on my own, which made a very rocky start. So when I went to Bowie for my graduate program, it was a different shift because I had already really been conditioned to, I got to figure this out on my own. I made sure I knew the classes, how to advise myself, because I didn't have any advising. My advisor never showed up the one or two times that I signed up for on his door at my white university. Okay, I'm a quick learner with certain things, right? So I'm gonna figure this out on my own when I get to Bowie. But when I get there, it was different. I still did my advising thing on my own because again, once shot, twice shot, I'm just gonna, or burned or whatever the saying is. But I realized I didn't have to do that because the faculty members were very welcoming if I had a question, even if I wasn't necessarily in their program. Mm-hmm. I could go to any of them and they would try to work with me. And as I mentioned, I am still in contact actually with my practicum professor. I didn't take a class from him, but we've seen each other over the years at the ACA, the American Counseling Association conferences. He remembered me from then. We still have a relationship. He reaches out once or twice a year. We'll ask if I'm going to a conference, and if I am, well, look, let's make sure that we connect, and we do. So it was a very different experience for me, and I found myself almost leading a peer support. And as I mentioned to my colleagues, and people don't always believe this, I actually am on the more introversion side. I was quieter. I've gotten a little more vocal as I've gotten older, but I found myself while at Bowie creating my own study groups, even when I didn't necessarily need them. I thought I needed them. And when I think about it, I actually did. My colleagues needed the content part, right? I was good with the content part. But as Dr. Maiden said, as part of our research, that peer social integration that really connected with the academic piece was powerful. So I still have some friends that moved through that time at Bowie with me in different segments. I met some of them a couple of years later. You know, we connected through that, and they thanked me because they said, you know, if it wasn't for you, I may not have passed that comprehensive exam the first time because I was on it, you know. But again, that comes back from my experience at a PWI going, I don't have any support. I got to figure this out on my own. And I carried that with me. But I realized that it's a different space, that collectivistic element that really follows a lot of the non-white cultures, you know, to support was there. I just had to see it. So that was a really good experience for me. And that's what I think connects with the article, because I could see that I fared better in my graduate development at the HBCU level, even though I was, you know, grown, and I carried that with me. And in my own teachings, I carry that that mentality, that collectivistic mentality with the students, you know, with whom I work.
Yeah, and I don't want to make any assumptions about listeners' prior knowledge. So predominantly white institutions, PWI and HBCU, historically Black college and university. And I appreciate the fact that you kind of bring to life in your personal examples how these relationships can form organically, and how Black students can create their own systems of support on campus. And it's really, I don't know how you all feel about this, but it's encouraging to me to see the ethnic themed residence communities on some campuses emerge, and other institutes on campuses, forms of support. And through these examples that you all are giving in the article, you use the language of academic and social integration. I want to ask if you all can, if someone can define those two terms that you compare by institution type, academic and social integration. Can you define that, those two terms, just for the sake of listeners?
So academic integration, it consists of interaction with faculty, how your faculty develops you, how they help you grow. So that has to deal with the faculty involvement, the academic piece. Uh, uh, Classroom activities, in-class activities, those are things that are considered academic support. The social support, the social interaction, is those organizations such as Dr. Thorne talked about, these peer groups, these national associations that you may join, the Black Counselor Association, the Black Student Association. Those are activities specifically for people of color at PWIs that they would join to help them navigate and earn degree attainment. So that's the difference between academic integration and social integration.
Okay, and one of the things you all found was that there was, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but there was more faculty concern and academic intellectual development from the HBCU students. What do you all think explains that that finding?
Well, I just think people, as a Black professor, I just think that we're able to pick up on when students have issues. We especially students of color, we listen more intently. We know the struggle, and we know the struggle because of our lived experience. We can understand when students aren't doing well, and I think we have a way of, because we have that mentoring element of us that we want to encourage them to succeed. So we kind of have our eyes wide open because we want to ensure that students are successful. I know for me personally, I take students under my wing for mentorship and for research. And so when you talk about when you speak about growth, the growth mindset, it's about preparing students so they can know that they have the potential to reach this, or to reach that. For instance, if we're working on research together, So the goal of this research is for you to present this either with me or by yourself, or for us to get a publication out of the research. So that is what is needed. That is what students are looking for. And at HBCUs, professors are more likely to reach out to your hand and say, hey, come on, as opposed to the experiences of me. I could say me personally at a predominantly white institution. No one was reaching out to me to ask me to do research with them. I had peers, white peers, who they were asked to conduct research, but I was never that person to be asked. So that still stays with me. That, I mean, I walk with that every day, and and so that forces me to always, just to be aware of the needs of African American students or students of color.
Thank you, Dr.
I
Maiden.
want to personalize the experience a bit. My undergraduate institution was an HBCU. So I'm a new freshman on the campus. And my English teacher gave us an index card and asked us to write our name, write if we lived on campus or not on campus, put your phone number. That was pre-cell phones, of course. So we put our dorm number, but then she asked for your mom or your dad's phone number. So if I hadn't seen you in a few days in class, and I called your room and couldn't get you, I'm going to call your mom and your dad and find out what's going on. That's the kind of community that I experience personally, and I see happening more often than not at HBCUs. I went to a PWI for my specialist degree in school psychology. I can tell you how to get to Strauss Hall because that's where psychology was housed. I know where the library is. It just happened to be next door to Strauss Hall. I know where I paid my tuition, and I know where the student center is because Chick-fil-A was in there. I don't know how to get anywhere else on that campus. I was one Black male in my cohort, the only Black student in my cohort. There was a Black male student behind me, in the cohort behind me, that was pushed out of the program. The white students studied together. I found out by overhearing, and it was a small cohort, there were 6 of us. I found out by overhearing them talk about, oh yeah, I left my book at your house when we studied last night. Well, I was never invited to the study group. I can't call a professor, and of course it's years later, at this PWI and ask for a letter of recommendation because I didn't have those kind of relationships. But I can still call professors from my undergraduate experience, from my master's experience, and definitely from my doctoral experience to get those things. I get calls on my birthday. I send texts or calls on Mother's Day, Father's Day, Christmas. So that sense of community is built for students at HBCUs. But here's the shift though. Dr. Maiden talked about a growth mindset. If PWIs are serious about engaging Black students on their campus in their doctoral programs, that shift has to happen. You too have to nurture Black students. You too have to go to a Black student. You don't have to be a Black male to mentor a Black male. That's what Dr. Maiden was saying. That's what the research suggested. They need someone to hold their hand. I remember being a doctoral student. I need someone to hold my hand and say, this is how you engage in scholarly research. This is how you contribute to the body of knowledge. Let's do it together. Let me hold your hand. I'll take the lead the first time as the faculty member, but the next time, get ready, you're gonna be the lead author. That's how we develop the next generation of scholars. That's how we really deconstruct racist systems or systems of racism on PWI campuses. But until we're ready to have those kinds of conversations and really talk about equality, equity is not equality, and really talk about engaging Black students in that kind of way, and understand Black students come, we've heard the term lived experiences several times. They come with a whole different type of lived experiences. My work right now is in K-12. So, I can't expect someone from a low SES necessarily, I don't want to generalize, to come have a child come from a literacy rich home and he is reading in kindergarten, or because, you know, the unfortunate thing is rather than have your child say thank you, we're having a child still say tie-tie. And we're saying tie-tie to the child. Or we're saying you want your baba rather than your bottle. So we have to consider, and as counselor educators, more important, because we start with where you are. So we have to understand those lived experiences of the students that we get, meet them where they are, but take them to where we know they need to go. And that's really all the fanciness of this research actually says. And Black students can be successful at PWIs if given the support structures to be successful.
So I want to jump in. Yeah, I'm sorry. You're just taking over your show, Dr. McDougall.
No, please, I mean, please go ahead.
There were a couple things that came to mind while they were speaking. One, the idea of Du Bois's double consciousness, right? Which is a fancy way now we just say coded language, but double consciousness. So in terms of answering or addressing partially the question of why might HBCUs or students who graduate from HBCUs, why might they feel like or experience better social and academic integration? So I think that's one thing, because you have a whole campus full, the majority, because not everybody who teaches at a HBCU happens to be Black, right, or of color. But the vast majority have these experiences of having to float in the world with double consciousness, right? So I think that's one reason why the students fare a little bit better. But then to really tap into what Dr. Stewart was saying from my particular lens and wheelhouse is, so in order for non-white folk, specifically Black and Indigenous, and depending on the spectrum or the scale, the colorist scale of those who identify as Latino or Hispanic, if you really are identified more and your experiences have been in the world of Blackness, because that's how you're going to be identified, your lived experience, the thing is that at most PWIs, and even some HBCUs, but I would say more PWIs, most people are not comfortable with really talking about white supremacy, because then these white faculty members and these white students have to then come up off of their white fragility. So Robin DiAngelo has coined this very pretty term that every single one of us, and probably most of your listeners, will understand viscerally this experience of having your life or the way you move through the world discounted, your being called threatening when it's not. Historically speaking, people who don't represent any realm of whiteness have been threatened. We've been murdered. We've been lynched. We've been raped. We've been, all of these, the gamut, right? So I think the challenging part is not just having the conversation. That is part of it, but walking the walk. And so what folks have to openly acknowledge is, again, the systems and the way the institutions support this hierarchy of whiteness, right? To the deficit and the downfall actually of all of humanity, because they can't talk about it, because that means that then they have to acknowledge it, and then they say, well, I'm not a racist, but there are elements of it. You don't even really understand what racism truly is, right? So to be able to have the conversation, you have to cut through the fragile. The people of whiteness need to be bold and brave. They need to turn pink and fuchsia when they are faced with a situation or a conversation or a person that the situation, the conversation is moving through. They have to become comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? In order to support and not default to their place of fear. Because for a person like me, all that does is frustrate me, because see, I can call it out, because then I have to move through my double consciousness and my language, right? The coded language. I have to switch because I understand what is happening, right? But then those that PWI, that institution itself, and the people who create it still have that hidden power to quite literally silence me or you or your listeners because they don't want to hear our perspective. And there are a multitude of perspectives. That's the other thing. This is not a binary. It's not a binary. The social economic, the SES ladder and continuum is vast in any culture, in any place. You know, and I think that there is a problem with society, honestly, at large. They have a hard time hearing truth and real conversations. And we all need to get over those feelings and understand that everything that we're talking about, in the essence of it, has been in play and in motion and been created far, centuries ago. And it is no excuse. I am not that person that says, oh, things happened so long ago and they don't matter. No, they do, because psychologically, every single person is affected, regardless of how you've been, whatever you've been ascribed with. And I think it's important for the listeners to understand when I use the word ascribed, that's powerful, because that's not something that I determined, I labeled, it's been placed on us. And most people don't even understand the ideology of race. They don't understand white supremacy. They don't understand that whiteness was created. It is a made-up thing. It is absolutely a political tool. But there's so much that comes with it, that comes from so many different directions and so many different places, and it's global, but it impacts all of us. And so in order to get to what Dr. Stewart was talking about, there are glaring macro conversations, there are very nuanced conversations, but there is a whole psychological process that I think a lot of people are afraid to even engage in, and that is still problematic.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think in particular, the part where you mentioned about that we're all affected, that none of us goes unaffected. And when I was looking at you all, the comparison you all had on institution type, I have been at 2 universities, San Francisco State and Cal State LA, both of which qualify as MSI, Minority Servant Institution, but the Black students on both campuses have the same concerns that students have on PWI campuses under the umbrella of an MSI, so that's something that when I was looking at you all's work, I'm like, in the future, I'd like to see some studies that kind of like expose the fact that these experiences do not go away because of this label of MSI at a lot of universities. And one of the questions that I sent you all was like, again, like to explain it, what explains the difference between this institution type and academic and social integration that you all found? And then I wanted to ask you all to speak to what Dr. Maiden talked about in terms of growth mindset, and then Dr. Stewart talked about in terms of actions that PWIs have to take, and the courageousness that Dr. Thorne mentioned that needs to take place on PWI campuses. Dr. Mizelle Johnson, I want to ask you what I start to question my question. Why am I just asking about what PWIs can learn from this research? What about HBCUs do you think? Do you think that what can HBCUs gain from this research, even given the fact that the outcomes seem to favor, correct me if I'm wrong, favor HBCUs? What would you say? That's kind of off the cuff. I didn't send you all that one, but it just comes to mind.
It's okay. No. That's a great question. I think HBCUs need to continue doing what they're doing. And if that's working, keep working, keep using that model. I think, I don't think it's something in place per se. It's just something that we have supposed to do it. I think they do it because they know that works. I don't think they have a model saying, okay, I'm gonna call, like I think Dr. Stewart said, I'm gonna call my student to see if they're okay. I think somebody did that to me. Like I think so. I forgot. I think Dr. Maiden mentioned how you have to model what you want done, and somebody will call and check up, or call and say, "Hey, I heard a family member passed away. How are you doing today?" So now, what was happening with us during COVID and Black Lives Matter movement, I would check in on my students. That's what I had to do this past year. Are you okay? I would start off each class. Are you okay? Anything you want to talk about in class, and then have everybody talk about, their emotions and their feelings and their thoughts. I think that made it more, made us closer and made the class more successful. Dr. Maiden was in that particular class. He was also teaching that particular class. And I think that made the students more aware of what was going on in the field. So to answer your question more clearly, I think succinctly, I think HBCUs can learn that what they're doing is working. I think that, like I keep saying, the collective, that family oriented, being the facilitator, the mentor, the supervisor, the professor, we all have to wear those particular different hats, I think, to be more successful when working with our students and for retention purposes and for academic success.
And hey, you're right on point with that, Dr. Mizelle. I also think that what we need to do is we need to start recruiting. These PWIs are kicking our butts at recruiting us to their institution. And once we get there, they don't have the support that we need to be successful. We may somehow graduate and get through the program, but they don't have the resources that HBCUs have. And so HBCUs, they need to go out and recruit people of color to their programs. Additionally, for the field of counseling, our accreditation has moved toward CACREP, but that's where the accrediting body is going. And currently, there's only one PhD program, one HBCU PhD program out there. And so the HBCUs, they need to have doctorate programs in counseling, and they need to be CACREP accredited. So that's the first and foremost thing, and then recruit. And as Dr. Mizelle said, hey, keep doing what you're doing because it's working.
I want to add, I gotta be a little provocative. Here's what I want to add. I still hold tight to, there still needs to be very transparent recognition about how white supremacy works, even through HBCUs. I don't think people want to have that conversation, but it exists. There's also, again, the true impact of where you are on the social economic ladder, but also the idea of perception is huge. I talked about the psychological piece. Colorism is huge. I'm kind of interested, Dr. McDougall, in what you have seen with the whole MSI piece. And this is what makes me think about it as well, that if the students who have been identified as Black on those campuses, or they identify themselves as living a Black experience, right? Because if you've lived a Black experience, regardless of socioeconomic status, you understand what that means. And I'm wondering too, if in that world and in that construct of minority serving institutions, and if you look at those against the HBCU, those experiences, if this idea of colorism, which is, in the face, a reflection of white supremacy, if those things aren't addressed, you're still going to have certain segment of the the population who may not fare as well, solely because the racism and white supremacy at its nuanced levels through colorism haven't been addressed. Just because somebody goes to an HBCU or teaches at an HBCU doesn't mean they haven't been affected by racism or white supremacy and that ideology. So while I think HBCUs are overall doing a very, very great job at the mentoring that we're talking about, I have met people who have matriculated through HBCUs and doctoral programs who still have the mindset of white supremacy, racism, through the lens of colorism or through their construct of what social economic status represents. So I think, we still need to challenge and really take the power away from white supremacy and embrace all of our students and support them, because people have had varying lived experiences, and most of that has been through racism, but also largely through the social economic. You know, your middle class Black folk or upper class Black folk may have depending on the situation, a different experience from a person who comes from an impoverished community. But if you're faced with that white police officer, y'all are the same, you know, that potentiality. So I think that we still need to make sure that Du Bois's ideology of understanding what double consciousness is, we still need to acknowledge that and kind of move with our students through that. That's just my take.
No, I appreciate that, especially that emphasis on the fact that we need to have the courage to have conversations about and speak directly to white supremacy. And I know that Dr. Stewart, you have to sign off pretty soon, but I want to ask you to build on the last portion of the paper. One thing I appreciate about this paper is that you all have an extensive section at the end on what should be done, what needs to be done, and how this research can be used to improve the experiences of Black males in counselor education. Is there anything that you would add that we haven't yet spoken to about how this research can be used to improve the experiences of Black males in counselor education in PWI or HBCU?
Well, Dr. Maiden sounded a big alarm when he said that we need more graduate programs that are CACREP accredited at the doctoral level in counseling. The credibility for having a doctorate in counselor education is there only in a CACREP accredited program. And North Carolina A&T is the only program that has a program. So the conversation needs to start there for HBCUs. We have to develop more CACREP accredited doctoral programs in counselor education. What my PWI friends can actually take away from this article is look for ways for academic and social integration to intersect more for students of color, not just Black men, but for students of color. Help them to feel like they belong in that space at that time that they're going through the program. Dr. Maiden sees things from a student support lens. So look at the wraparound services or the supports that are needed to help a student. That support can simply be forcing a student through a counseling experience themselves because they're dealing with their own trauma. I too have to unpack the feelings I have from feeling like I've experienced racism and the trauma associated with that. So understanding that at my PWI counterpart and providing those supports to get me through that experience and to attain my degree. Just looking at other hard and soft skills that a student in a doctoral program in counselor education will need. How do we develop you into a better clinician? And at the doctoral level in counselor education, it's about going back to the academy to train the next generation of counselors. So how can I make you also a good teacher? In my research class, I talk about being a scientist practitioner or a practitioner scientist, whichever you prefer to identify with. But how do I teach you still to practice the science or be the practitioner in counseling, but also understand research and the scholarship around counseling, but then the intersection of that and andragogy as you deliver the content to your pre-service counselors. So those are some of the very basic constructs that are needed to start with in this conversation. If we're really serious about growing the number of Black men who complete K-CREP accredited doctoral programs in counselor education. Those systems have to be there in order for it to happen.
And thank you for that. And with just under 10 minutes left, I want to make sure that I get this question in, or I probably should have asked it earlier, but I wanted to know what your assessment is of how Black male doctoral degree attainment, how, historically speaking, it's a historical question, how has it changed? Black male representation in doctoral programs in general, how has it changed over the past 50 years or so? What's the evolution of that?
In the 70s, Black men made up about 65% of the Black folk who got doctorates. Now that number is down to about 10%. So it's flipped. So now Black women are out earning doctorates more than Black men. Black women continue on a trajectory. The numbers are doubling year to year to year. The number of Black women who are getting doctorates. The number of Black men hasn't grown a whole percent over the years. So the numbers are dismal. So there definitely is a need to get more Black men in doctoral programs to completion, not just in the program. I think it was Dr. Mizelle who talked about students who had other life challenges and they dropped out of their programs without completing. That can't be the answer. The answer has to be, I'm going to get you in and get you completed successfully with the tools that you need to be successful. So there's been we flipped the pendulum upside down, and now women out earn doctorates, outpace Black men. But then we've had no movement over these years. I mean, we've grown less than a percentage point of Black men attaining a doctorate. The number is dismal, especially in counseling. But it's a bigger conversation. We don't have Black males in. We have very few Black males in master level programs. We have very few Black males who are LPCs. We have very few Black males who are school psychologists. Just a few years ago, even in school psychology, there's a national credential, National Certified School Psychologist. I hold that credential. Less than 1% of the population of NCSPs are Black males. Less than 1% of the population. Again, another mental health field. So we need Black men in mental health. And our programs, our graduate programs, HBCU and PWI, MSI, have to really commit themselves to recruiting Black males into these programs. It's just that serious. We're at that serious point right now.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I just looked at that. I mean, I've seen that before, and I appreciate you giving more specificity to that difference. And as I'm reading it and hearing it, I'm thinking, like, what accounts for that? Is it because degree attainment is becoming more equitable? Is it because of societal or social factors and that have shifted over the years, economic? I don't know. But yeah, I wanted to ask you what explains that shift over the past 50 years?
Well, what I want to throw in really quickly, so I teach, so Dr. Stewart talked about andragogy, right? So for people who don't know, that's just a fancy word for talking about how do adult learners learn versus pedagogy, which is geared towards children and their developmental stage. So anyway, the undergraduate program that I teach in, or the programs are, they focus on adult undergraduate students, right? The university that I work in historically is an all-female, university. They're traditional. But the academic unit that I work in has always, since its inception, educated males and females. And what I can say is males are absolutely the minority. Absolutely. I think in the classes that I've taught in the spring, I think I've had two males. One was Black one identified as white. 2. So I think we need to take it back even, at the beginning. So in order to move up to the doctorate, you got to start somewhere. I don't know what the stats are with Black males earning undergraduate degrees, but you got to kind of start there before we can bump them up to the doctorate. So I don't know if it's life experiences and having to work. I don't the supporting and those tropes of got to support the whole family and women's empowerment. I'm really not sure what the answer is, but I do know that we can't skip the step, going through K through 12 on up to undergraduate to even get them there. Yeah. And that's also part of the problem. So it's a big educational systemic problem as well. And I don't know, since we're on the East, we're seeing that on the West Coast, that trend as well in your world, Dr. McDougall.
Oh, absolutely. I've seen a lot of, yeah, I've definitely seen it. It's seen it here, and there are a lot of initiatives that have emerged, men of color initiatives, et cetera. And it does, I mean, I'm happy when I see those initiatives emerge, but then I also, there's a part of me that thinks, well, we need some specific programs for Black males, because the of color, sometimes we can be marginalized in the of color conversation. Can you all hear me? My microphone.
Yes, I can.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yes, we can hear.
Thanks. Appreciate that. So yeah, I mean, we can close soon. I just wanted to say that I think that this article that you all wrote, and I just want to remind people that it's entitled "Examining Factors That Promote Doctoral Degree Attainment for African American Males in Counselor Education Programs," published in the Journal of African American Males in Education. And I think that this is a unique set of, you all are a unique set of voices of scholars, because you're teachers, yes, but also counselors, also scholars, in the sense that this is research, but this is not research in the abstract. This is not research in any detached kind of a way, because you all did research on what you do every day. So this is practice-based research, which to me, I think that's the highest level of knowledge on something, when you're doing research about something that you actually practice. So I hope that you all have more people to invite you to talk at universities, and I hope that this article gets wide circulation, especially among Black people in general. And I know that if the students who I know, the Black students, I know that when they see you all on something like this, they'll probably be thinking, wow, we need them here. So I'm very grateful that you all accepted this invitation. And I just want to offer, if you all have, I'm going to ask you to send me any social media information that you have by email, please, so that I can share that under the video when we publish it. But I want to ask if there's any closing remarks that you all would like to make before we finish, that have gone unaddressed, or anything that's gone unstated that you think is particularly significant.
I just want to just say two things that I just jotted down. That's very important, that HBCU should continue to do, and what PWI should do is faculty engagement, scholarship research. For PWIs, reduce onlyness. And we don't want to be the only person on campus not experiencing resources, not experiencing faculty development. So those are my two things.
I'm gonna add just one thing, and it extends from the previous conversation, that, is this idea of ACEs, or even trauma-informed counseling. So ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. Racism is one, right? Poverty is another, but also trauma-informed counseling. And through counselor education programs or practitioner programs or even teacher education programs, right? Extending that, I would venture to say most, if not all, students of color have experienced some form of trauma. Also students of whiteness have experienced some version of trauma that hadn't been characterized as such. So that is an important element that I think not just our work touches on, but that brings in this real life experiences that often go unchallenged or unmet. And I would just kind of urge not just HBCUs or PWIs, but public school systems to think seriously about their students, what they do, how they do their own lives, and examine it from that particular perspective so that they don't further traumatize who they're working with or training or even themselves. So that's what I want to leave you with.
I'll just say thank you, Dr. McDougall, for giving us this platform, and thank you for your courageousness to have these conversations in this platform. Thank you for the work that you're doing to unpack systems that hinder equity and equality for everyone, not just Black and brown folk, but for everyone. So thank you.
No problem. These are, to me, the hidden gems, and these are hidden gems for me. Black people who have done research, and it lives in these articles that I don't think enough people see. Some of the best things, the best ideas I've ever seen have come from articles, and people don't discuss articles enough, I don't think. So this is very exciting for me. And I thank you all for joining, and I hope you all catch the next episode of Afrometrics Research-Based News.
Thank you.
Thank you.